So Taylor Swift said that storytelling sets her apart. But is she really as good of a storyteller in her songwriting as everyone believes? As a StoryGrid certified editor, I had to ask, just how good are Taylor's stories really? And don't get me wrong, she's written some iconic songs, but I wanted to go deeper. I wanted to break down exactly how well she's telling these stories and see if her reputation as a master storyteller holds up when you really analyze the craft. So I put her 11 studio albums under the microscope, looking at over 160 songs and dissecting each one using over 75 storytelling criteria. I'm able to do that because for those of you not familiar with the StoryGrid, we take a highly analytical approach to understanding how stories work. We are spreadsheeters, breaking stories down to dissect their structure, and we can even map the progression of a story into a graph. So I don't just look at the lyrics, I dissect them. I've analyzed discographies from bands like Placebo, My Chemical Romance, or Green Day, breaking down every song, having done this process in hundreds of songs. And now I've done the same thing for Taylor Swift. I'm going to show you what I found out about Taylor's storytelling, how her songwriting has changed over the years, and what you can learn from her, the do's and the don'ts. So is Taylor really the storytelling genius everyone says she is? Here's how we do it. We will go through her strengths, her weaknesses, and then we'll talk about her special sauce that makes Taylor Swift in her songwriting. So first off, let's talk about what Taylor does really well. Because despite what we're about to dig into later, there's no denying that Taylor has some serious songwriting strengths. And among all the criteria that I looked at, I found 3 key areas where she really shines. First up, imagery. Taylor has a gift for painting vivid pictures in her lyrics. Take a song like All Too Well. Those lines make you feel the heartbreak, and the imagery is so sharp you can almost see it happening. And this isn't just one song. Based on my analysis, she's painting strong images with words in over 90% of her songs. To pull the listener into the world of the song, including the song's main character's literal action, is another powerful way to evoke moving pictures in their mind's eye. In her song Fearless, the entire song is built with a heavy focus on action words that signal movement. And it's done so with the intention because the song is about wanting to fearlessly move into a new relationship. Or look at the song I Can Do It With a Broken Heart. In this one, the chosen verbs also support the message and the title of the song. And across her 11 studio albums, also 90% of her songs include literal actions that tell the audience what the song's main character is doing so they can vividly picture what's going on. Another way to evoke images is by including the place, so the characters in the song don't just float in an empty space, but the audience can ground them somewhere. And Taylor Swift is really good at including the place in a way that is more than a rough mention of a street or a room, as you can see in her song Coney Island. From the beginning, we can see that the way she focuses on including the setting has become one of her trademarks in songwriting. If you are a songwriter yourself and you want to learn how to include and best express the place in your lyrics, I've got 2 videos that are exactly about this. They come with a huge list of how Taylor Swift has included the place in her lyrics. Check the link for this in the description below. Furthermore, Taylor is also really good at letting the audience know when the story is happening. For instance, her song Back to December includes lots of time references, whether that's the season, a specific event, a month, or the kind of days. Even though she's been neglecting including the time reference on some albums more than others, overall she still scores 86% on her entire discography. But when it comes to giving the audience a feeling for how long an event from her life lasts, we are mostly left in the dark. We don't know if it was only a day, a month, or a year, or a longer period of time. And of course, to help the audience understand who is in that place, who is doing the literal action, Taylor Swift nails it in letting the audience know who the song's main character is. Her point of view works every single time. In over 80% of the cases, we know who the song's main character is. There is no confusion about that. If there's dialogue included or it's referred to what another person said, then this is clearly indicated, so we always know who said what. She's doing that, for example, through dialogue tags. And most importantly, we get introduced to the song's main character in the first verse, in most cases. This is vital so the audience knows right away who that person is with whom they can identify. This helps to foster the emotional connection between the listener and the song's main character. So regarding her strength in painting images with words, you can see that her best-selling album 1989 is doing well in all of those aspects. In case you were wondering, the dark blue background shows the streaming and sales figures of each album, so we can track how successful each album was. Of course, there are also other records that fulfill those criteria, but we'll get to why 1989 sold better than the other ones as we continue to explore Taylor's craft. Taylor Swift's second strength is that she can write about things that happen to the song's main character, that are caused by external things. So genre does not refer to her music genre, but to the content of her lyrics and what her songs are actually about. At StoryGrid, we have defined 9 external and 3 internal kinds of stories. They let the audience know what kind of story to expect, and each of those stories comes with certain properties that need to be fulfilled to satisfy the audience's expectation. This specifically means that, as you can see here, she mostly writes love songs. Big surprise, right? But since she is an artist, she occasionally writes songs about her life as an artist as well. And in 96% of her songs, she has included an external content genre. Now the question is, how well does she satisfy her audience's expectations regarding that content genre? And we'll get to that in a moment. Firstly, she's also good at including what the song's main character wants, because that desire should be related to the content genre. Meaning, in a love story, the character wants something around the need for love and belonging. In a performance story, they crave esteem and recognition. So in her song Endgame, she's super obvious with stating what she wants. It's a love song, and she wants him. And if your song's main character has something they desire, it gives the audience a reason to root for them, either hoping they get what they want, or in some cases, they do not. And in 92% of her songs, she has a song's main character who desires something, and the audience clearly knows what that is. If the character wants something, they also have a strategy that consists of different tactics in how they go about achieving what they want. For example, in her song Love Story, the characters are trying to hide their relationship because they felt like Romeo and Juliet. They were keeping it a secret. And in around 85% of her songs, the character does have one or a series of tactics that they do to attain what they want or don't want. And they switch between tactics when one tactic fails to work, so they keep following their strategy. And we've already talked about that Taylor is good at including the literal action to paint a clear image of what the characters in her songs are literally doing. And the thing is, their literal action should be an expression of their micro-strategy. For example, in her song Shake It Off, the micro-strategy is wanting to ignore what other people think of her, and she does so by shaking it off as she dances. And again, she's having that connection in most of her songs. So regarding what her songs are externally about, her album 1989 once again does a really good job at those things. Still, to satisfy audiences' expectations, we also have to include at least one obligatory moment of that content genre and one convention, because those things help the audience understand that it's indeed, for instance, a love story. In a love story, an obligatory moment is something like the meet cute, the first kiss, the confession of love, or the breakup. Genre conventions are like specific requirements on the context given and the characters or circumstances within, like having helpers and harmers in a love story, a rival, or secrets and having rituals between the lovers. And finally, her third biggest strength is creating an emotional connection with the listener by including a relatable problem that the song's main character struggles with. In Teardrops on My Guitar, she taps into that feeling of longing and unrequited love. It's specific to her story, but everyone can see themselves in it. In 95% of her songs, the problem the song's main character deals with is clearly defined. And in almost all her songs, the song keeps revolving around that problem. My data also shows that 81% of her songs tap into highly relatable, common emotional experiences, making her stories resonate with a huge audience. But as you can see, in the last years, she has neglected what once made her so good at taking personal experiences and making them universal. When you nowadays listen to her songs, most of them are so tailored on Taylor Swift that they aren't that relatable anymore. They have become so personal that it's getting harder to put oneself in the shoes of her song's main character. Despite this change, she's still pretty good at including the problem right at the beginning of the song. That's how you create an emotional connection with the listener and intrigue them because they want to know how that problem gets solved. And she's doing a good job at letting the audience know about this in her song's beginnings. Still, if you wanted to hook someone with your first line, including the problem in the song's opening line is the way to go. But Taylor is not doing that very often. She does use some other first line techniques to hook the listener right away, but overall, her first lines aren't that strong. Regarding her strength in creating that emotional connection with her audience, she is also skilled in including the first key moment of a story. That's the moment that sets the entire story in motion. It's an initial disturbance that gives rise to the problem the main character will have to deal with. It's perceived as a challenge or a threat. Overall, in over 80% of her songs, she has included an inciting interaction. That is the first key story moment. Still, some of those moments are very weak and hard to recognize as the moment that sets the whole thing in motion. Considering her way of creating an emotional connection for her listeners and the conflict within the song that the song's main character faces, her best-selling album 1989 again did the best job in those things. So Taylor excels in 3 areas: imagery, external content genre, and creating an emotional connection through the story's problem. But does that make her a great storyteller? Let's move on to the weaknesses because there's a lot to break down. And among all the criteria that I looked at, I found 3 key areas where she struggles. And what we'll be talking about might surprise you. And the first one is all about the message her songs convey to the audience. This one is quite interesting, even though lots of her songs revolve around a problem that the song's main character is dealing with. In less than 40% of her songs, the audience can go away with a prescriptive and helpful takeaway that could give them direction for their own life if they face a similar struggle. Considering their external conflict, less than half of her songs include how the external situation of the song's main character changes. In only 1/3 of her songs is it an external change for the better. Regarding her entire discography, you see there's no consistency. Looks a bit like it depends on her mood to determine how prescriptive the album will be. The second area where Taylor can still improve is regarding the internal content genre. Those genres refer to what's going on internally in a person. It's about someone's internal needs, whether that's respect and status stories, updating their worldview, or how they will be remembered. Even though there's an internal content genre included in over 3/4 of her songs, the way the song's main character is presented in a positive light is only in half of the songs. Furthermore, most songs do not include an obligatory moment of the internal content genre or one of its conventions. And in case you are wondering why that's so important, it comes back to the song's takeaway. The internal value change shows the song's character's transformation, how they become a better or worse person, and how they are able to adapt to change. In half of her songs, we have that internal shift of the song's main character. In around 40% of all her songs, it's a shift to the positive. So knowing there's only a positive external shift in around 29% of her songs and a positive internal shift in 41% of her songs, Taylor Swift actually having an empowering and uplifting chorus in her songs like Shake It Off, In Me, or in Fearless is in less than 20% of her songs, especially when we consider that the chorus is what people learn to sing along to first. It can become like a mantra, as Michael Jackson said himself, and so many of her songs don't allow the listener to feel positively empowered by singing along to the chorus. And right here you can see its significance, because each time the internal content genre is paid more attention to and the songs have a positive internal shift, it helps the record's success. And so let's move on to a third major thing where she isn't as strong as she definitely could be. And that's, I hate to say it, but it's her storytelling. From an editor's perspective regarding the craft of telling a working story. Now, what do I mean by a working story? Well, each story consists of 5 key story moments that make a story work. They form the narrative journey or the story's progression from one place to another. And it includes an inciting interaction, the initial disturbance that sets everything in motion, a turning point that changes the entire situation, and that throws the main character into a this or that crisis with meaningful stakes. And it requires them to act on their choice in the climax. And that can either be a heroic or an anti-heroic choice. And their choice leads to a better or worse place for them, which makes it a cautionary or a prescriptive tale. If you would like to find out more about those moments and about storytelling and songwriting, then please follow the resources provided in the description below. If we specifically want to look at one of Taylor's songs, then in her song, The Story of Us, the key story moment 1 is the breakup of the 2 lovers. The turning point is when the character realizes that this disturbance poses specifically a problem to them. Her crisis is whether she risks getting hurt again or if she remains strong. One option could possibly increase the chance of getting him back, while the other option is losing him but avoiding getting hurt too bad in case it goes wrong. And her choice was to ignore him. She kept her armor up, which leads to the resolution that their love story has turned into a tragedy. It communicates the meaningful message that love fails when lovers do not pick up the courage to talk about the things that are pulling them apart. When it comes to Taylor's songs, her single releases tell more working stories than her pure album tracks, giving her roughly 60% of her songs that tell a working story. A working story in a song is defined by having a turning point included and the climax. The inciting interaction, the crises, and the resolution can be implied, at least in a song. They don't need to be mentioned explicitly, but the turning point and the climax are like cause and effect, action and reaction. That's what we need to include for a working story. Now, when it comes to including all those 5 key story moments, only a third of her songs have them. Interestingly enough, her best-selling album 1989 scores the highest in this criterion, with over 60% of her songs telling a full story. Something to consider, right? Now, we've already talked about her being able to include the inciting interaction, so here's another graph that shows you that most of those initial disturbances are caused by another person. Only 8% of her songs are due to coincidence. Think of this like the lovers meet by chance for the first time. And 4% are correlational, meaning something happens to someone else and the song's main character is indirectly affected by it. Now, the key story moment 2 is still super good for Taylor. Over 3/4 of her songs include the turning point, one of the most important moments of them all. But is that turning point really that strong? Well, you can see it right here. In less than half of her songs, it's a strong one that truly sticks out. And in most of her songs, we can also tell what the crises for the song's main character must be. But most of the time, it's more guessing. It's not really highlighted where we can truly tell, oh, those are the 2 options. That's her best bad choice or her irreconcilable goods choice. Now, where it gets interesting are the last 2 key story moments. She still manages to include the character's crisis decision, but only 40% have a climax that is really noticeable as such. Especially when you look at this, because the climax choice should always be expressed by a literal action. Like in Gloria Gaynor's song I Will Survive, where her decision is shown by throwing that guy out. But in Taylor's songs, only 33% have an action expressing the song's main character's choice, which shows why we don't encounter a strong climax in most of her songs. So we have around 43% of songs that have a courageous choice to move on, and roughly 10% where the song's main character does not adapt to the changing context of their situation. The last key story moment is the resolution, which helps us determine if the character's choice was the right one to make in the given context regarding their problem. Unfortunately, only 41% of her songs deliver the outcome, so that the audience knows how it all turns out for the song's main character. And again, the songs with a resolution that really nails the consequences of where it all led to are only about 30% of her songs. So you can see how that, in turn, affects the takeaway of the song. It's just not clear enough. So only 38% of her songs are prescriptive, 17% are cautionary, and over 45% of her songs don't tell a story that leads to a takeaway for the audience. And the reason why we tell stories is to actually communicate a meaningful takeaway. Once again, here you can see how her best-selling album tells the most stories because it includes the 5 key story moments, as well as having the climax expressed by a literal action. So now that we know the answer to our question from the beginning and how good of a storyteller Taylor Swift is, what makes her then Taylor Swift? What's her special sauce when it's not necessarily the craft of telling working stories? What else makes her songwriting so highly praised? As a recap, her strengths were her way with words, especially setting up the story with pulling us into the world of the song, the context, and the conflict. And her weakness was in being able to deliver on the promise made by delivering a meaningful takeaway, including the song's main character's transformation, and telling a working story that resolves the conflict. So what is her special sauce that makes Taylor Swift in her songwriting? First of all, her songs are meant to focus on external challenges. In over 80% of her songs, the external content genre is the primary one, meaning it's more emphasized and focused on than the internal content genre. She wants to highlight the external conflict and not necessarily the internal change of the song's main character. Maybe that's why she keeps finding herself in the same struggles. Who knows, right? So 96% of her songs included an external content genre. In that sense, regarding the focus on the external content genre, Taylor Swift loves to write love songs and explore everything about it. Only 10% of her songs are about something else than love. And even though she has explored all the 6 obligatory moments of a love story in her songs, she heavily focuses on songs about the breakup, about the confession of love, and about meeting a new lover for the very first time. Concerning the love story conventions, in so many songs, the conflict arises because of some kind of opposing forces, whether that's people who are against the relationship or some other antagonistic forces. Lots of songs also include secrets that make it all more complicated, or there's a love triangle. Furthermore, Taylor is very strict about her choice of point of view. 85% of her songs are written in the POV of direct address, where we have the interaction between a first and second person. In around 9% of her songs, we have a working combination of different point of views, and 6% of her songs are in first person only. This makes her songs always super conversational and very close to the heart. Added to that, Taylor Swift tries to keep the emotional distance between the song's main character and the listener fairly close. This is done by giving the audience an insight into the thoughts and feelings of the song's main character. And in half of her songs, we're close to that person. which helps to create empathy and sympathy for them because we are better able to understand what's going on in them internally. And when it comes to her pure album tracks and her single releases are only slightly stronger. On her first album, the most powerful songs were chosen as single releases. As you can see, those are the songs with the golden disc in front of them. But after that, it's been quite a mix on all the following records, showing she doesn't choose between which songs tell the strongest stories and which ones don't. Why that is, we have to ask her, but I guess she chooses the songs that are most important to her, that mean the most to her. So among all the things we've mentioned about her songwriting, her special sauce goes hand in hand with her strength. She has a very specific audience, people who love to listen to love songs and experience her ups and downs with her, because, as she said it before, she is sharing her story in her songs. It's less about the craft of storytelling, but pulling the listener into her life, sharing what happened to her, and wrapping it in a song. It's all about her stories.